Welcome back to Ales and Fails Miniatures. Today I will be showing you how to craft these Evergreen Forest Scatter Terrain. Some of these are some woodland scenics trees, which if you don't know who they are, they make amazing scenery trees, but they are a little soft for playing in an RPG. So I'll show you how to toughen those up to make them ready for your table, and show you how to craft the rest of it to make a really good looking scatter terrain. Let's get into it. Okay, so these are the woodland scenics trees, and I think these trees look amazing. They just don't seem to hold up on a D&D table very well. The foam starts to flake off of them, so how I counteract that is by watering down some PVA glue and spreading it across all of the foam, which basically just turns it to hardened glue without actually taking away any of the detail. And again, these are really nice trees. I just like to stiffen them up a little bit so that they are a little bit more durable, because I do not currently play at my house, so I do have to move all of my terrain and things when we use them. So I just really like to try to make sure that they are as durable as possible. And you can see here, you try to just put as much as you can and spray it down back and forth, or use some isopropyl alcohol to help that glue flow. It seems to do the trick, and you want to get it as deep into that tree as possible. Now that the trees have had ample time to dry, my next step here, since they are just a singular color foam, I like to go in. This is a camo shade wash that I go in and put around the entire outside, and then spray the tree down to help it absorb deeper into the tree to give it a little bit more shading and shadow. I also do this with some of the other ones with a lighter green to hit the outsides to make it look like sun is hitting the outside of the trees. This just helps them look a little bit more realistic. But now that the trees are finished and I'm letting them dry, it's time to start on the bases for these. So what I did is took a 1/4 inch piece of plywood and drew just random designs on it, some smaller, some bigger, so that I could later cut these out with a jigsaw, and I would use those as my base templates. I like using wood because it's nice and firm and stays pretty flat, usually doesn't warp or anything, so that's why I went with this material. And the next step after cutting them out was to go in with a Dremel and sand them down to the actual shape that I wanted, and round all of the edges to make it look a little bit more natural and realistic. I also like using this to give variance to the top of them so that they're not just flat, so it looks a little bit more like actual ground that is a little bit hilly or rocky. But once I cut out all of these, to be honest, I went back and cut out a bunch more because I didn't think I had enough. And I also decided that I wanted to glue a couple on top of each other to make small rock outcroppings. To glue these together, I used actual wood glue. I thought that would probably be the strongest bond that I could get. And once I let those dry, I actually went back and covered the entire pieces in wood glue so that the wood glue could kind of soak down into them and make them even harder. Once those were thoroughly dried, I went back in with some black Mod Podge, which is basically the same thing as glue but has a little bit of resin in it, where it also hardens nicely and will give me a nice base coat to start painting on. While those were off to the side drying, it was time for me to start working on the rocky outcroppings. I did this by taking a razor knife and drawing long lines all the way across it, and then doing them in the opposite direction. And this just kind of helps split up the texture and makes it look a little bit more natural. Once those lines were there, I just went in and started picking away at it, and it's okay if you go all the way through. It just helps with the actual texture later. I know you can't really tell here, but for some reason this actually looks extremely good. It looks like natural stone, so that's the reason why I do it that way. And once I am happy with the way it looks, I just go back and glue it on with Eileen's tacky glue. I cut the foam down into strips that's about the height of the wood piece itself, but just a little bit taller. I can trim off anything extra later on. This was a little finicky, so I did have to end up using some painter's tape to hold them in place while the glue dried. But once it was dried, the next step was to grab some Sculpt-A-Mold and fill in the gaps on the top so that it all looked cohesive. Sculpt-A-Mold is a great product. You basically just take it out, mix it with a little bit of water until it looks something kind of like cottage cheese, and you just apply it in the areas that you want. And once it's dried for about 10 or 15 minutes, you can go back with a wet finger and smooth it all out to look very nice and natural for some type of forest floor, or you can use it for a lot of different things. But in this case, with fir forest floor, it looked amazing. After letting the Sculpt-A-Mold dry for about 24 hours, I came in with some Sterling Mud by Citadel. This is a technical paint that has a little bit of sand in it, so it just helps give the forest floor a lot more texture and realism. Once the Sterling Mud was dry, I went in with a white primer and hit all of the pieces of foam that were meant to look like stone so that I could begin to paint. The first step in painting the stone on this was to go in with a very light gray and get full coverage across all of the areas that are meant to be stone. It's okay to go a little bit high or beyond the areas that you want stone. You can always go back later on and cover them back with Sterling Mud. But once the gray had dried, I went in with a white dry brush and hit all the high spots going from top to bottom to show off where the sun would have been hitting. And this is where the stone really starts to come to life. By hitting all of those high spots, it just brings out all of the detail. And I do a pretty aggressive dry brush here because I do plan on going back in with a wash to help show all the shadows as well. My first time around, I did try to start dry brushing the Sterling Mud to bring out some of that detail, but later on I went back and changed it up a little bit, so you can skip this step. The first wash I'm using here is Nuln Oil, and instead of covering the whole piece, I just go in and lightly blotch it on in random areas in different amounts, and then I take my spray bottle filled with water and spray it down. This helps it look a lot more natural and gives it a good variance. Since I am spraying this, it does take quite a while to dry, unfortunately, but once that has dried completely, I go back in with a Agrax Earth Shade wash and hit a couple of random spots and a Camo Shade wash as well, just to give it that nice, clean variance, which gives it that natural look. Once I've sprayed the wash, I do go back with a wet paintbrush and hit any spots that seem overly aggressive or not natural. This just will help spread it out and give it a much better look. So this next step was something completely new to me that I wanted to try out. Is what I actually do is hit a decent amount of the piece with some watered down PVA glue, and I will then put static grass on it, but instead of having it sit up, I actually will try to mat it down, which gives the ground a texture that looks a lot like fallen pine needles. Obviously, I will have to go back and paint it to make it look right, but off the bat, I was pretty excited with the way this was looking. I did find the best way to make all of the grass lay down to look more like pine needles rather than grass was to use the back end of the paintbrush and kind of roll it back and forth and then poke and prod it to try to make it look as natural as possible, like the wind's been blowing the needles around. To paint this, I used a couple of different light browns and watered them down before patting it back off with a paper towel, and then going in with a tannish yellow dry brush to hit all of the pine needles before finally putting on a wash to help give it depth again. And I think this looked good, but I did end up going back and doing a very, very light dry brush of that same yellowish tan just to kind of bring some life back to the pine needles. But once that was finished, my favorite part is up next, and that's adding all the sticks, the leaves, the little bits of bark onto the ground. I just always feel like this brings the scene to life. In this step, I also made some fake little pine cones by taking some of Army Painter's Battleground and dropping a little bit of Eileen's tacky glue onto my work mat and rolling around the Battleground. This actually made really nice looking fake pine cones. And once all of the sticks and leaves and everything were on, I did go in and add some actual grass to this, some static grass, and this time I did let it stay upright. I don't have a static grass applicator, so I just do it by hand, and it usually turns out pretty well. I think the key with this step is just to try to be as random as possible and just do anything you can to make it seem like the grass is growing in natural places, and also leaving areas where there's not going to be grass, because in a taiga forest like this, there's not as much grass on the ground. In a forest like this, you will see a lot of moss, so I did go in and hit all the tops of logs and random places on the ground, and what I did then is just covered it completely, pushed it down a little bit, and then I will kind of tap it off and then take a brush and wipe any extra off as well, and I think this did a great job of mimicking natural moss. The last step for this project is to add the trees and bushes. So I used Eileen's tacky glue to glue down the bushes, and for the trees I actually used my Dremel, drilled a hole, and then would stick the trunk of the tree into the hole and glue it in that way. Just makes them a little bit more sturdy. Once all of this was thoroughly dry, I did a Krylon clear coat for them, and that was this project complete. On to B-roll. All right, guys, if you have made it this far in the video, I just want to thank you. Really appreciate all your guys' support. I think these turned out absolutely amazing. They look extremely nice up close, far away. I think all the trees are extremely durable. They don't really, nothing comes off of them anymore. So I think these turned out awesome. If you guys liked it, please make sure to hit that like and subscribe, and we'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.